as you could see, that was a taste of life with Swamiji in Gurgaon. And Dharmarajan and I moved there 2 years after this time that you got to see, and we got to spend very intimate time with Swamiji in this way. His house was just a couple blocks away. We would just walk over for things. Sometimes we would go to the mall with him and have coffee, or a group of us would go to an Italian restaurant called Tonino's, and we would all have a meal there. And Swamiji also would enjoy going to the salon and getting his hair cut and maybe a manicure or a foot massage or something like that. And when Dharmarajan and I first went over February of 2006, he had just invited us to go visit him, and so we went to India, went to Gurgaon. I had never been to India before. Dharmarajan had been to Kerala because of his family based in Trivandrum, and his father's side. And so anyway, Gurgaon smelled of diesel fuel, and but it was very unique. It was very unique. We took lots of rickshaw rides, and at that time they were bicycle rickshaws. They were all over the place. But that's when Swamiji asked us to move to India, and he had said a couple years earlier he wanted us to move to India at some point. So that was the invitation. And Gurgaon was an easy town to get around in, and we lived in kind of a gated community, and there were malls there. There were malls all over the place, but that's where you would get everything, and nice little restaurants. And so anyway, we got to go to those places with Swamiji. And that house that you saw in the film, he lived on the top floor for a while, and then they bought the house down the road. They were renting this house that you saw, but down the road they bought the house for Swamiji, and he furnished it. Then after we lived there, we lived in the house you saw, that was called B10 by 8, for a couple years. Everybody had a room, and then there was a common room. It was like an ashram. There was a common room. The temple was in the basement. That's where satsang was and morning sadhana. And then we would we had a lot of fun. Ashram living is not easy, but we had a lot of fun there. And of course, Swamiji's joy permeated the whole environment. Every room we were in was just full of bliss with him. And he was telling the story. He didn't tell the complete story, but he was talking about how when his temple, they tried to build on the land at Ananda Village a temple, and they were using those domes, putting those domes together, but they didn't quite know how to do it. And Swamiji would say, he was not a carpenter. And anyway, finally, on the third try, I don't know if some new people came who knew how to do it, but anyway, on the third try, they finally got the temple up, and it stayed up. But when the episode he was talking about was, I guess, before they put the final one up, it had fallen down twice. And you would think there would just be frustration in the air, and why can't you get things right? Those kinds of feelings. But instead, he was just looking off into the distance, but whispering under his breath, so much joy, so much joy. He was just in bliss. That was in probably 60 something, maybe even 66, and Jyotish was near him and heard that. And so early on, people knew Swamiji was very much a free soul and very much in bliss. He just didn't show us all the time. Back to Gurgaon, after a couple years of living in B10 by 8, we got to move to his house for a couple more years also, but we lived there as kind of the caretakers. We had other jobs to do, but we lived in his house when he wasn't there. In the last 2 years, he wasn't as often there, and then also Ananda split. Half of the people went to Pune, half stayed in Gurgaon. And so we stayed in Gurgaon, and he and a group of people went to Pune to develop the land. So he had a house in each place, but we would make sure the generator worked and get the ACs maintained. Meanwhile, we lived in this gorgeous house. But it was filled with his vibration, and his meditation room was there, and his bedroom, and we had to clean it. So that meant we had to go in and be able to clean. And if we might have stolen a few moments in his chair or something to just feel his vibration even more deeply. And sometimes people would come over and we would let them meditate in his room a little bit. It was very, very dear. And then he would come to town, or we spent a lot of time in Pune also. We would go to Pune. Swamiji was doing Bhagavad Gita shows at one point, and we got to stay there for some weeks to be with him while he filmed those. And in between each session, we got to ask questions, and so we just got to be there all day, bathing in his bliss while he spoke about the Bhagavad Gita. You just can't imagine a better situation of just hearing him talk about the Gita. It was just so beautiful. And he did 108 shows. We got to see them nearly all. And so anyway, I'm not saying this to say we got to spend time with Swamiji. You didn't. Not at all. Swamiji would reminisce about being with Master also. What I can say for sure is the people we have met here and all over the world who have not met Swamiji can be just as attuned as anyone who has. That his kindness lives through all of us, and also his bliss. He's very close to us, and on these times of birthdays and things like that, he's especially close. We have that ability to feel his closeness. So call on that. The veil is thinner at this time. Call on him to be with you, to be in your heart. And he is there already. Like I said, you don't have to have been with him. Don't feel badly about that. He's with you already. Just as Master was not in the body when we came on the path. Master left his body before I was born. And yet, when I came to Ananda, I felt Master so close. So close. I would have lots of dreams with him, and then meeting Swamiji, and so anyway, this path has beautiful living gurus in it that exist in our heart and are guiding us very strongly to do what we do. And I liked how the affirmation today was about kindness, because Swamiji was so kind, and he was not kind to be pleasing to anyone. he was kind because he believed in behaving dharmically. And yato jaya tato, what is it again? Say the whole things from the beginning. Yato dharma tato jaya, which is living in dharma. That's right. Sorry. Where there is dharma, there is victory. And so, sorry, there's a lot of joy in the room. So he lived by this. Where there is dharma, there is victory. He lived by living in his center, in his spine. And when you live like that, so much strongly in your spine, and you behave perfectly dharmically, was really what his behavior was, perfectly dharmically. He was a jivan mukta. He was not creating any more karma. So when he was in his spine, it's so much easier to be kind to others because you know that you are living from complete dharma. And if others have a reaction to you, you know you've done nothing wrong if you're living in dharma. So if they have a reaction, you can respond with kindness because you know it doesn't have to do with anything with you. And I don't think all of us can claim that. I don't think we're Jivan Muktas, but if we begin, even Sri Yukteswarji saying, from now on, if we behave correctly, good things can happen. So, and Swamiji just showed how you can live so dharmically and so kindly. And so he could give kindness without expecting it in return. He could give kindness just knowing that it was a force for good, and that kindness poured out of his heart. And it wasn't that he was some soft jelly person. He wasn't a soft mama type. And yet that kindness that flowed through him was from Divine Mother, was from Master, and it was an extremely comforting bliss blanket, like a bliss blanket that would come into the room. And so, and he had extreme compassion for people also. When people were going through suffering of some sort, whether it's emotional or spiritual suffering, he had great compassion for it because he had been there before. He talked often about how he was racked with self-doubt and just doubt in general, doubt about everything. And so he knew what it was to suffer because doubt creates suffering. And especially self-doubt creates suffering very much. So he knew what it felt like, and so he had compassion for people and endless patience. His patience level was amazing. People would misbehave around him all over the place. He would be honest and could easily set someone on their ear, but he did it out of dharma. He did not do it out of unkindness. There was always love around the way he gave any kind of correction, and he only gave correction to people who were open to it. He didn't impose on people that were not open to it. He could tell if you were open to him or not, and he could tell when he had an opening or not. He would talk about how sometimes he would wait years before he could give the feedback to someone he knew they needed it, but they had to be open and the timing had to be right for them to hear it. Otherwise, you can talk till your face is blue, trying to help someone, but if they're not open to it, then you can't give them the help. And so better to send prayers, better to just be a listening ear, until one day they are open to hear feedback, not your desires. He wasn't talking about his desires for that person to be a certain way. It was more he could see the suffering. He could see what the solution to the suffering could be. But if they weren't open to it, he wouldn't say it. And sometimes it could be brutal honesty. I can definitely say I heard some good, honest comments, and I'm ever grateful. You know, every interaction I had, I can remember many, many. And so I find myself thinking back on things he said and things he knew much better than I. And so I have extreme gratitude for what he was able to express and say to both of us, actually. He was, anyway, the best friend you could ever have, really. And but again, I want to emphasize, he is with all of us. It doesn't matter whether you met him or not. He's in our hearts, all of us. And many people we know at Ananda, Chennai, and around India who did not meet him have dreams of him, feel close to him, feel his guidance. And it's not imaginary, it's real. Because for those who are open to him, and the extent that you are open is the extent that he will bless your life. Same for Master and all of our gurus. The extent that you are able to be open and receive the bliss and the love that's there for you, the ability, the more you'll get. And it's just as simple as that. And sure, it helps to meditate hard and make sure you're meditating and doing all your meditating. That's this path. But, you know, he loves us whether we're in meditation or not. He is there for guidance when we have hard times as well as good times. If we can give our lives over to him, give our lives over to Master. Swamiji showed how to give our life over to Master, and yet Swamiji was there for us. So he taught how to give your life over, how to be completely committed to your spiritual life. I don't mean just committed to Ananda. I mean committed to your spiritual life, committed to wanting God. He taught us how to love God. He loved God very often as Divine Mother. He taught us how to love God as Divine Mother, and who is a very real part of life. And so there, I could probably go on and on and on about how wonderful and beautiful he was as a soul. And anyway, we're eternally grateful for all that he did. And, you know, one of his last acts was to send Dharmarajan and I here to Chennai, and we're extremely grateful for that. We have found such devoted disciples here, such devoted people who want to serve Master and Swamiji. And so it was a really great thing that he did that for us, and it felt like he really blessed Ananda Chennai's work in that it keeps expanding, and we're feeling very taken care of during the coronavirus thing. So anyway, we want to just wish you, God bless you on Swamiji's birthday,